Hi, my name is Shelby Dhalla-Kim. I'm a passion coach, and this is Firestart Chat. Firestart Chats are intimate conversations with people who have and are clarifying their passions for change. We'll hear their stories, their experiences, and tools on how they've been able to do that.
I'm excited to be speaking with Chidiogo Akunyili-Parr, a Nigerian Canadian author, speaker, and consultant with a passion for human development and connection. She is the founder of She Roars, an organization committed to coaching women of color from around the world connect to their intuition and purpose. Her work is focused on harnessing the power of our interdependence with the foundation and the humanist African philosophy of Ubuntu, which celebrates our shared humanity. Chidiogo has lived and worked across 4 continents and speaks 7 languages, including Mandarin, Spanish, German, and French, allowing for an even deeper connection with people. Hear her stories and how she roars through her embodiment of writing, journaling, and leadership. Thank you so much for taking this time. I know you're in a flow and movement. There's a lot of beautiful things happening in your life, and I'm so excited to go deep into some of the insights that you're learning throughout this time. But before we talk about the present, I actually wanted to start off with your past so that people have some context. You had a points in your interviews and conversations talked about how growing up in Nigeria, it's either lawyer, doctor, or engineer. And I wanted to ask, can you elaborate on that? And what for you has been your unlearning experience from those 3 paths that were something that you grew up in Nigeria hearing about and maybe believing that that was also your path?
I'll start with saying that it was, every parent wants the best for their children. And in Nigeria, the path that we knew from, let's just say, sort of like colonial into independence, parents' generation basically, was lawyer, engineer, doctor. Those are the paths that will ensure success. Everything else would be part of the masses trying to figure it out, a lot of struggles. So this basically led to so many Nigerian parents, and Nigerians, we really push ourselves. That's what we're known for. Our parents push us. Academics is huge for the reasons that I'm mentioning. You want a better life. So it's not something you questioning as a child. It's just the reality of it. Since I was born, my parents had a dream of 6 of us, were 6 children, 6 doctors was the dream. Since we were little, we all knew my father would take us, my father's a doctor himself, would take us to the operating room at 8-5 and make you watch operations. And unknown to him, that actually turned me away from medicine. But my learning has been coming of age into my own self, into my own truth of what do I want to do. And I think I do stand on the shoulders of giants, so to say, because my sister, who is older than me, was the first to go against the doctor's streak. She chose to be an artist. And before that, there were 3 doctors. And this was huge because artist was the lowest of anything possible because that's guaranteed, at least the way my parents saw it, that you'd starve. This was something they told her. And she went on to find her own success and, stuck to her path. And I remember there was this moment I was in an office. I was working in China at the time, in Beijing, and there was a lawyer co-worker. I'm going to go to law school because I've decided not to be a doctor, but lawyer, it's the next. And she's like, but why? What do you like about law? I was like, oh, no, I'm not going to practice law. I'm just going to get the degree and then figure out what I need to do. And she's like, do you know how hard law school is and the hours of reading? I was like, read it? She's like, it's dry. And it's dry. And there's just this moment of sitting with a mentor and realizing that I had just, been repeating this lawyer. And often I was told, you be a lawyer because you're stubborn and you talk a lot. So there you go. And there's more, there's more to that. So to make a long story short, I started asking myself the questions around what do I want to do? Sort of like realizing that for so long I just accepted that this would be the case and who I would be in. Because I was carrying these layers of other people's stories. And then my own learning has really just been to start listening deeply into the answers that come when I do ask these questions. What do I want? What makes me come alive is a question that I know that you would ask, Shelby. What ignites that fire, and everything else comes from that. Just those questions, following each breadcrumb of inspiration.
These questions, these powerful questions. And as you were asking yourself some of these questions, I know there were a few pivotal moments in your life. You had at one point talked about when you were 9, and then again at age 17 when you went abroad for the first time, and then also in your 20s when you came back. And I think the words you used were rude awakening. So could you take us back to whichever of those pivotal moments? You don't have to cover all 3, but whichever ones maybe in this moment you want to talk about, and tell us what was going on and what were some of the questions you were asking yourself then, and how did you move through that?
Life, it's, when you're in a pivotal moment, you don't know that you are in what. I find really interested in life. As you mentioned, like, oh yeah, those were pivotal moments. 9, I went off to boarding school, but I was a child, so I'm just sort of, doing what I'm meant to be doing, going to school, and it changed me a lot being far from home and in boarding school, but not in a way that feels like sort of inspired, learning. I would say, moved to the States after high school, finding out who you are in a new country is always interesting. But I think what really changed me was a solo journey that I made. A few things. I think the first thing was when I moved to Berlin. This was the first time in my life. I must have been 21-ish. It was after I graduated from undergrad. And why this changed me was I didn't realize it then, but it was the first time in my life that I was not linked to any sense of who I was meant to be. How do I put this? So when you move into boarding school, boarding school when I was 9, I had my sisters before me, so I was meant to be, this person's sister, and there's a reputation to live up to. And then I wanted to be head girl, so I had to live up to that. And then in undergrad, I went to the same uni as my sister, so she had friends, and they're like, "Oh, you're Sonto's sister," and my 2 sisters have gone to UPenn as well. So Sonto and Ijoma sister again. And within that, you are in a context where you're meant to be something. So you're always praying in those pockets of and who you're meant to be. When I moved to Berlin, I was nobody. Nobody knew me. I knew nobody. The city is just this was 2007. So Berlin was in the core of its artistic fire, which meant that everybody was welcome and everything was welcome. So suddenly I didn't have to put on a mask, which I didn't even know were masks. I could now start sort of going, wait, who am I? Who can I wear today? How can I show up? How do I want to show up? Who do I want to be friends with? Because before that, in some ways, your circles are predetermined by all these circumstances of school, whatever that is. And now it's I was friends with waitresses or, people that were just not in any part of my professional school educational circles. And that was thrilling. And it allowed me to see that there was more to me, and to also enjoy the discovery of layers. So that was a beautiful, pivotal moment. I lived 1 year in Berlin. I think at the end of that year, so much changed, and I rooted into the knowing that freedom was the most important ingredient for my flowering. I'll pause there. Yes.
Okay, so you were talking about enjoying the layers, like seeing the layers. What were some of the layers during that time you think you were seeing and taking off? Or I don't know if that's the right word, because you talked about a mask, or is it layers that you were putting on as a metaphor? Like what was the layers that you're talking about?
Was certainly taken off. It's the layers of being one thing, being when you're meant to be a good student, a good girl, studious, hardworking, career-driven, all these things become who I am. But who else, right? So when you step out of, in my case, I stepped out of the group that was where there's maybe competition to be that which I'm meant to be, into a group of people that were just doing different things with their lives. So we're artists, creatives, no job, just like floated in life. And there's something about hanging out with groups like that allows you to come closer to who you are beyond, what's the job you're getting? Do you have interviews at Goldman Sachs? Do you, what grades do you get in that class? What class are you taking? Those had been my conversations. Suddenly the world explodes and you're talking about things that have nothing to do with the life that you had known in a country in a different language. So you get to tap also into a new personality because you're not also in your comfortable tongue, in this case, maybe English or Igbo. It should have been in Nigeria back home. So I think it was just tapping into something else. And once you connect to the truth of, there's more, there's no going back, then the rest of my life has been a journey of like, what's there? And I would say that was sort of the first time I got to know that there was more in some way consciously, sort of like, this is interesting. What's going on there? Right? So it was a peeking in, and then really enjoy what I saw, and everything has come from that.
And when you were peeking it, is that also when you experienced freedom? Because you were mentioning you realized that freedom was a core ingredient to your flowering. How did you... This might be a hard question because obviously freedom is so vast and deep. But and I'm wondering, like, do you recall any moments where you had clarity that freedom was one of your main ingredients?
As I mentioned earlier, I don't think while I was living it, I understood. I wasn't as conscious, this is all like with hindsight, like, that was what was happening. I just knew that I was so happy. And freedom was the foundation. There was the freedom. It's when some communities, you go in, let's say, in a train, and everybody's a certain way, and you conform very quickly. We're social beings, very quickly you sit in a certain way, and you're quiet. Let's say you're in a train in Tokyo, you're not going to be loud, you're going to be a little more quiet because that's the energy. So Berlin, the energy was, do you, all of you is welcome. And it, in a way that's respectful, nobody is imposing on anybody, but you can, so you walk in a train and people look at different ways and are expressing themselves in different ways. And I wasn't, initially, I was just living. So I got to make friends with people that were also in different walks of life. So I think the freedom there was the bedrock And then upon that was sort of then okay, with that permission, then I can maybe allow myself to ruffle my hair up a little bit and see what happens, you know? Like a little like, okay. So, but while I was in that, I didn't know what was happening. I just knew that there was something just coming awakening with each hangout and days spent where I was not Chidiogo Akunyili with whatever meanings that society and myself and family and school and, friendship circles had imposed upon me. I was shitty. No, nothing beyond that. And I was meeting new people every day. And I could be whoever I wanted to be. It's a big deal to not have to be anybody. At least for me, I didn't have to be anybody but myself. And I got to start asking the question, who am I? Who do I want to be? Who could I be? And allowing her to show up a little bit more beyond the expectations.
And when you were asking these questions, were there any things like common things I hear with people? Fear. Sometimes fear of what they might discover, think maybe I don't actually want that. Or they discover something and fear, it's like, I want that, but I don't know how to do that. Or I want that, but that will require so much change. So these are just some examples of fear that I hear about. Did you have any fear come up for you? And if so, what were the stories that it was telling you?
Well, that happened later. So mind you, I'm 21. So it's a perfect age because it's easier to not care too much about the voice of fear, right? Because you have the luxury of time somewhere in the back of your mind. So that I was still, showing I had a job in a Institute for Cultural Diplomacy. I was, showing up in an office eventually. So I was still, stay focused. And but I would say the one moving away from that example of Berlin, the one space where I was hugely pivotal for my life was I was in Peru at a retreat that ended up being a women's retreat. It was about 2014 and 15. And I had this huge awakening that was to leave my life working in corporate, which had been the last 10 years of my life. I'd been working in corporate. And I literally was fighting against this message that was coming through. Like, no. And I would articulate this. Luckily, I had a guide right there with me who was able to say something along the lines of, what are you afraid of? What is who you are is in the other side of your fears. And I was like, no, you're wrong. I've worked too hard and too long. You have no idea. Just been grinding for years. This path, this is my path. I'm going to be, UN Secretary General, right? Insert whatever aspiration. I was just like head of something, just keep climbing. I was like, no, you're wrong. So this was fascinating for me to literally hear my fear just fighting, this, hanging on to my identity, who I'm meant to be, and to hear this gentle, let go, trust me. And this was huge. And it took me 2 years after that to slowly unravel all the, because it can happen overnight, but it takes a little courage to build up and then finally say, I am closing this chapter. And, I remember the thing I was so afraid of, what people are going to, the question, what are you going to do? And normally I had a great answer. Oh, I'm going to have this job now in the next great organization and the next great position. Now it's like, I don't know. I'm going to figure it out. And there's such a vulnerability to that. I never did not know. Suddenly, thousands of people potentially asking you, because that was the network I was part of. Like, what are you going to do? Like, oh, well, you're moving on. Like, tell me about this great new opportunity. It's like, nothing. So that was the stage where my fear was huge and I had to move through it. And I know that was the right path.
How did you hear it? Was it, so you were saying at this retreat, like, was it was a message, intuition? What was that? How did you have a relationship to that, to know what it was telling you?
So part of my reconnecting to self has been to realize that I hear things. And it's almost like a voice that whispers something, but it's not. I don't even know. I don't know. I just hear messages. And now I know as well to just like I keep my warning pages. I have it right here. It was like where right for ages and ages and ages, and I always just ask now, like, anything you want to tell me. Then I listen and I kind of like consciously now connect to what I'm meant to hear. And it's nothing extraordinary. It's just part of my gifts. And it's my intuition is very very sensitive. I pick up on things, and I have now honed it to pick up on as well in a way that it's almost a voice, right? Because we can pick up in a sensation, your skin feels something, and a voice is just your brain interpreting those cues into something that you can understand. So in that case, I was falling sick, let's say, not waking up feeling da-da-da, but you're not hearing that as a message. You're just like, oh, I don't know, I'm just like feel low. Well, what if you could start putting these things together and get the message? This is not the right place for you, right? So when I hear things, it might feel a little more spectacular, but in truth, I can pick up on all the cues and bring it into my awareness in a way that I can hear it. And that was what was happening. I was also aided by plant medicine in that space. So it was really, we're at a mountain, waterfall in the background, and women in a circle. So it was amplified space to receive.
Yeah. As you're talking about that, it's reminding me of how, for me, one of the things I've noticed is my body trembles when there's like something that is making me feel with such powerful intensity that my body is responding to it. And sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's something that excites me. Often it's both. And over time, I've been trying to learn and discern what does tremble potentially mean. That's not just being cold, but something where my body's trying to signal to me, hey, there's this opportunity. Look at it. There's something for you to learn. Look at it. So I can relate, for you to hear the voice. For me, I feel my body.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I trust that we all have these gifts. Think of the classic when a tsunamis come in and animals know to go to the top of a hill or mountain. We have intuitions that are super powerful and are meant to guide us on the right path or to safety. And to ignore them, I think, is to work against ourselves. So I try to really listen, especially given how noisy our lives and the world around us can be. So it becomes an active, there's an active need to listen. That's what I find. And whenever I sort of go into let's say, a noisy moment in my life, like something breaks down, always, either emotionally, physically, mentally, something just, and it's always like, oh yeah, I haven't checked in. I haven't made time. I haven't listened. I haven't kind of gone beyond where I'm being dragged. So I'm like, okay, wait a second. Where do I need to be? Where do I need to focus on? And listen for that, for that answer that comes through. And a lot of the work that I love doing is supporting people, especially women, to hear that in themselves, because everybody has a way that they can receive and sort of turn on your antenna, and so you can receive, what needs to come your way. Because how powerful is that, and how disempowering not to lean on.
Yeah, I've been to your workshop during the pandemic when you gathered folks to come together online, and one of the modalities used is what you just talked about, your journaling, and you encouraged us to listen to ourselves by journaling. And then remember, we did a group share, and I remember being like, this is so powerful and yet so simple as a tool. And so I wanted to ask you, because I know journaling has been one of the ways that you've, as you're saying, listened, but also a way for you to grow your writing practice that led you to writing your book. And so, can you tell us a little bit about that journey of what it was like to journal, then turn that into a book?
It's funny. I'll just start with saying I'm trying to come up with a second book, and it's just funny to see myself doing this again, and like always like, so this is my process. Because the first time you're just stumbling around. So my process is very much I think in line with what I shared earlier. Okay, how do I break this down? Okay, so I'll start from the beginning. Morning Pages has been with me for about a decade. For about a decade, I've written almost every morning. It doesn't have to be now. Like some mornings, I have a 14-month-old, so I trust that life doesn't always allow me to wake up and write. And the idea of Morning Pages, for anyone who's not familiar, is it's Julia Cameron, artist's way. Wake up in the morning before you reach for your phone, which please do not do in the morning. As much as possible, make space for coffee, a walk, anything. But in this case, I pick up a book and I write 3 pages shorthand. And the writing helps because you're not on your computer. The shorthand, it's more direct, talking about like feeling things in your coffee. And doing it before anything else allows you to be in that state of conscious unconscious and tapping into something that is a little more than maybe your to-dos and that's the demands of the day. Keeping Morning Pages has allowed me to hear my voice because there's something about writing for 10 years, 3 pages every day, the thousands and thousands of words I've written, that eventually you trust that there's a well within yourself because it never dries. I think there's something huge there. It's just we have this well. It never goes dry. I think nature gives us metaphors of our truth. And there's just no moment you put pen on paper that is like, there's nothing to express. There's always something within us. So like, wow. Like, think about that. Like, what does that mean? What a gift to be human. That's why there's so many books out there, because there's no end to the well, and it, manifests in different ways for people, but the creating well never runs dry. And most certainly nurturing it, and even more so. So I would say that's something I realized, and within it, always also being just amazed by what comes through. Let's call it that water that flows as well. Wow. And it's not been about reading it, feeling into how you're not even present, you just write it, just what's coming to you here at the way. and the voice, etc. So it's been a beautiful way to connect to my voice and my truth, and to hear and tune in within that, the message, right? The book that I am because we are. Thus, my mother's story came to me in a moment I was just sitting down and listening and honoring that. And then, the process that I was talking to earlier is that I start jotting things down. And literally, whenever I have a moment, like, okay, ideas, notes, da 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 da. And it's been beautiful to see how that turned into a full book. I turned pages of my book, and it's like, I can't believe I actually pulled this off. And now that I'm starting to think of a second book, I start seeing that same process. And it's like, okay, I have the idea. It's come through. Okay. Notes, little lines here and there, just jotting down when I'm writing my morning pages, and that's what wants to come through. I start jotting things down. And eventually I move to the computer, but I spend the first few months in my book just allowing myself to really make sure that I'm hearing what the book wants to be, is how I often think of it, as opposed to what I want the book to be, because I think it's me drawing in. So it's like, okay, I'm just gonna put a bucket in and see what's there, and my job is to pull, and just and that's what I'm doing. Eventually I'll then bring in my sort of like, okay, focus, sit down, put it together. But for now, it's just allowing the formation, and that happens here.
And do you recall what was going on when you got the idea for the second book? Like, do you remember your surrounding? What were you doing in that moment?
It's so funny you asked that question. Oh my goodness, because today I was writing some sort of notes for the book, and I was like, because this is a new idea. What was the last notes I wrote? Where should I write it? And then I turned around and I think I'll just read it to you, because it's like, hold on. Where are you? Okay. So I literally saw this line from the corner of my eye. I haven't fully read it. So the idea for the book came through the fire, atop a mountain, watching the rain pierce through fog before it hit the sea. It was whispered through a dear friend. I had asked on a whim, and something goes on. And I was like, I kind of opened this today. I was like, oh yeah, that's true. That's why the idea came. I was in this room. But this is me just sort of jotting things down and writing. And, okay, now I see some long goddesses, the danger of property protection. I don't always know how to read my writing. So, and here I have what do you think I should do? I always ask questions. And then I listen, and then I write. Sorry, this is what I have for now. But yeah, this was me sort of like jotting around and playing around. And yeah, if there was a fire, the offered is a fire.
How apt. I also love the dialogue that you have, like with the asking questions, and seeing what answers come up through that. It feels like the way I'm interpreting your experience with your writing is like, it's like you're not alone. Like you're writing. There's like, yeah, you're not alone. There's a dialogue happening.
Yeah, that was the second thing I read today. How are you tapping into all this? In my journal there, I was like basically reminding myself of that. Like, hey, I'm not alone, and I'm ready, and like activate where you were like, I'm ready. And the message that was coming to say, okay, it's maybe time to start writing things in my computer so I can move a little bit into the just sort of practical, because it's like all these pieces now everywhere. And my life is very different from when I wrote a first book, where it was me and me, right? And now I have a baby, which is challenging to find hours of quiet space, which is how I write. Is really like nobody talk to me 24 hours. I'm by myself writing. So it's going to be interesting to try to navigate this book in this new phase of my life. And that's what I'm asking for help right now. And that's where the message is sort of like, or reminder that I'm not alone, because it feels scary to try and manage this in this way.
And how is this second book writing experience process you're undertaking? How does this book represent the way that you roar? So as the founder of She Roars, supporting women unlock their potential and support their human development towards self-actualization, how are you embodying the practice of She Roars through this writing practice?
What I can say is that my deep knowing from working with women, from being with women, from supporting one another, is that community is key. Being in community with you, Shelby, learning from each other, being inspired by one another. So this book is an ode to that, to community. Yeah, it feels like, you're asking with this journey I'm on. It's community. It's the word that keeps coming. Okay, so what am I seeking? Community, and what am I? It's like, oh, I'm connecting to the essence in a way that feels like the time now is calling for us to, the way I had to unlearn and find my, let's call it, my spirit, my soul. I'm thinking of how do we find our soul tribe now? It's like, okay, I've come into myself. I can say I have a sense of who I am in the big picture as much as possible. It's a journey still, but we're clear. So now what I'm being called to is how do we amplify this community? And that's where our power really is. With the individual, it's not to be alone within your own self. You're not alone. So your own internal community, like, anchor that, huge. But then after all, you're still just one person, right? So how do you anchor your soul tribe? How do you support each other? How do you hold each other? And that what feels like the truth for me that I'm looking to explore in a way that my desire is always to support us in this moment, in this time that feels extremely critical and extremely powerful, and desiring for us to be intentional and awake. So my desire in this book is to do that as best as I know how, and into what needs to be heard that I can hear, what needs to be said that I have seen and experienced, in a way that I can share and gift to whoever is called to read.
And in your exploration of community, you also packed everything up and got in a van with your husband and your baby, and you have been visiting different communities. Can you tell us about that exploration?
Oh my goodness. We've been 3 months on the road, countless thousands of kilometers, and we visited small towns, big cities, middle of nowhere, homesteads, community, a lot of little communities, bigger communities. And, this is not by accident. It's why we set off on this trip, knowing that we were being called to learn how people were living. And by extension, how we want to live. Because we're conscious that whatever we know is maybe what we thought we're meant to be, how we think we're meant to be. But there's something about this time we're in that, that freedom. It's like you could raise your child anyway. You could live However, what do you choose? How do we choose that which nurtures us? That might not be a house and a fence and a car, and most certainly it's not that. We want our daughter to be surrounded by people, wanting us to be surrounded by people. How are people doing that? And what works out there? And how can we get inspired by it? So it's been really gorgeous to be welcomed into people's homes, into people's communities. The most recent one we visited, it's just like, you're walking on the path, this little girl like picking strawberries, or, and my daughter just watching her trying to figure out what's happening. Another kid comes over and they're doing a singing circle, and it's like, oh, this is just really lovely. What I've found is that you can't romanticize any of it. Be it the homesteads, it's like the community spaces, and this, Chanel. You live in community. It takes a lot of work, right? So seeing that, and also sort of checking, what do you really want? How do you want this to? So there's a lot happening, but a part of me is finding that while I thought that we had set out to see how we could replicate or plug into, what I was actually finding was how to be inspired for something larger than myself, ourselves, our family. And that's where this book comes from. It's like, oh, there's a bigger story. There's a bigger desire that was, there's a bigger call when you said home, Sorry, I don't have a clarity of an answer because I'm in it. In this pivotal moment, I'm living it right now. It doesn't look like it, but I'm pivoting. Right now. This moment, this day. So let's come back in 3 years and I'll tell you how this moment changed my whole life. And I didn't even know it, but I kind of know it, but I was certainly not put it into words.
Okay, well, my final question then, as you're in this moment of pivoting with exploration and you're listening to the call to birth another book where you roar and support us, and it's in a space of honoring communities, like you're in this beautiful moment. What helps you stay anchored? Because that can also bring a lot of change in your life. What do you do to stay anchored?
Trust, huge trust. Because we've been on the road. There's practical things. There's finances, practical. There is, a little one, practical. There's a lot of things that come in. There's relationship, partnership, how do we make it work together? There's sometimes doubt, what am I doing? Sometimes when it's raining and gloomy and the sad, it's like, what are we doing? Trust. Whenever I feel like I've lost my way, and that happens, when I just sort of feel ungrounded, happy, questioning, trust. And that's what sort of like brings me back. It's like, I trust. I'm here for a reason. Okay, what is that reason? And this goes back to maybe it's like, okay, I haven't checked in. Maybe I'm a little off a little bit of my, what do I need to focus on now? Okay, I trust that I've heard and received. So the trust is the thing that snaps me back, especially when things go wrong. This last week, we fell ill. We came here to see friends. We were well, COVID, etc., etc. So it's just like, okay, how do we trust that we're okay and everything's going to work out? So that's how I move through life, through challenges. I have a deep, deep trust in life, guidance, and this is founded on the fact that I always listen. And whenever I don't listen and I feel shaky, I try to make sure that I go back to listening, and then from there I trust. it's like, okay, I've done my part. That's how I navigate. That's how I anchor.
Chidi, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. And I love that we're ending on the note of trust. As you were sharing that, I can feel I don't know if you saw my body, but I was like this, because I don't know, my fears came up. And then I slowly, my shoulders kind of calmed down. And it's such a good and important reminder to trust. And also, given all the pivots that have happened in your life and like the magical adventures and stories that you have experienced and the kind of leadership and change that you're making through your creations and your self-expressions and your roaring, I'm like, you inspire me and remind me that leaders like you exist, and the kind of lifestyle that you design and that you're choosing can exist and is a possibility. So thank you so much for being you and continuing to trust in you and the guidance around you.
Thank you, Shelby. I feel like these are things I want to remember when, like, what am I doing? It's like, this is the path and this is why. And it's beautiful to walk it with you, this path and this journey, and you inspired me so much. And thank you for the invitation to be here, for the intention that we set at the beginning. It was really beautiful. And for the questions, by far my favorite conversation I've had online.
I have more questions, but that was only half. I'll do another one.
Yeah, this is wonderful. So thank you, Shelby. And I love all the ways that you hold space, and this is one of them. So thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you're interested in exploring your passion, check out my website, shilby.com. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Firestart Chat.